welcome to another edition of the Psych Monologues. I just don't have enough time. I really don't have enough time. And my day runs out before I'm ready to be done with it. Or it's just too long and I want to forget about it. But that's kind of something about what I want to talk about tonight. It's a strange topic. I don't know if it's a strange topic, but it would be something of interest, I think, as we're beginning to move into and kind of a series. I don't. Whenever I release a syllabus for my classes or I set the schedule up, it's a general guideline about where we're heading, but there really is no telling where I might land or head or what I might actually talk about. My students know that. That's how I keep them on the edge of their seat and coming back, because after all, they really don't know where or what rabbit hole I may run into or what off-ramp that's more planned I might actually do. But be that as it may, let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Ray Mitch, the host for the Psych Monologues. We are a day late. I will admit that. It's February 15th. We are dead center of the month of February. And what you're listening to is what I've called the Psych Monologues. It's a podcast that explores the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax. Let's talk about the issues that really matter to you. And part of that is, where you live, what you think, how you feel about living life with others and with Jesus, and maybe even life with yourself, which is a bigger topic, needless to say. Then maybe I have time, but hey, what the heck, we'll just give it a run. So if I had a drum roll, I would do it at this point in time, because drum roll, please, we have crossed a massive milestone, which I am both humbled and absolutely amazed by. But I was informed by Podbean, our platform that we distribute the podcast from, that we have achieved 5,000 downloads. That is absolutely amazing. And I can't thank you all enough, with the most humility that I can muster, that you've stuck with me this long and you've invited other people to listen in. And I pray that this is just the beginning of something big that allows us to talk about the things that maybe people are not spending a lot of time talking about. And it would draw more people to having these honest conversations about the spiritual journey that we're on, and what that actually looks like, and how do we get rid of all the extra stereotypes and caricatures and biases that we all have. So here's to achieving 7,500, maybe even 10,000. It seems unreachable at this point, but it's God has certainly surprised me thus far. So let's see what He has for the future and the adventure ahead of us. We are on episode 91, so we're rounding in on another milestone, which is 100 episodes, which is another thing that I simply can't wrap my head around. So we've got some great milestones to point to, and people listening, and that's gratifying. It's surprising for me that the stuff that I'm talking about is actually resonating with people out there. So I thought you would be interested to know. I'm hoping that we can get that banner up on the website, so other people know when they get to the website that indeed we have a podcast that y'all are listening to, that maybe a few other people are interested in as well. So back to our regular programming. Like I said at the beginning, I want to head into kind of a rough series about what spiritual formation actually looks like, and what are the obstacles for that same spiritual formation, because we do both. in a lot of cases, we love to talk about where we're heading, but we really don't account for the obstacles that we oftentimes bring with us, which is handy because I can't always look outside of me for the obstacles. I just bring them with me, and they tie me down and trip me up and become, my own set of mines, landmines and potholes that I step in and everything else. So that's kind of roughly where we're heading. Now, what I want to start with, which might sound a little odd, but I thought, if I'm going to start this series on spiritual formation, so where do I start? And it occurred to me that we need to start with time. After all, time is what we depend on as part of our spiritual formation. We are grounded, rooted, anchored in time. And it's an important element. And hopefully you'll see that by the time I'm done tonight. Because I thought, just out of humor, I would go looking for some interesting quotes about time. And I found some interesting ones, some kind of funny. But here's one that caught my attention. It says, "Time is free, but it's priceless. You can't own it, but you can use it. You can't keep it, but you can spend it. And once you've lost it, you can never get it back." See, we live in time, and it's so familiar to us, we don't even think about that. Here's another one. "Time waits for no one." Got that. Here's another one. "We kill time, we save time, we rob and get robbed of time, we lose time, and we have all the time in the world, but no one of us is powerful enough to stop the march of time or slow it down." Another one that really caught my attention is, "Men talk of killing time." You look at a group of people hanging around, you say, "What are you doing?" And they say, "Well, we're just killing time." But the interesting thing is that while men talk of killing time, while time quietly kills us. And the last one, and my favorite of sorts, is that it was posed by someone who clearly loved cats, which I am not part of that. I tolerate them. But it says, "Time spent with cats is never wasted," which, quite honestly, I think is ridiculous and stupid. But who am I? I know that I'm in the minority for a lot of people. And I have plenty of cat people in my life and family, and I'm sure I'll get strung up if they ever listen to this, which they rarely do, so I think I'm pretty safe. So, in light of that, I think that first quote caught my attention. "Time is free, but it's priceless. You can't own it, but you can use it. You can't keep it, but you can spend it. And once you've lost it, you'll never get it back." And I began to wonder, time, what role does it actually play? And is it important in our understanding of spiritual formation? So in light of that, I thought, well, let me just go back to the beginning of time, at least is how the Bible records it. And we have in Genesis an interesting thing that, a phenomenon, I suppose, for lack of a better way to put it, of description of time. And the book opens is "in the beginning," which is the beginning of time, the beginning of everything. And I am indebted, I will say this right out of the gate, but for a lead pastor that I was listening to at the church we're attending called Discovery Church. It's in Broomfield. A shout out to Zach Krieger for a lot of these ideas. He kind of ignited this fire as I began to think about it. And then I, as usual, hijack the idea and take it somewhere where he probably never intended. But be that as it may, what I want to point out to you, and you know, I know that a lot of times people listen to podcasts and they're not armed with their Bible in hand or anything like that. But something that caught my attention, and again, Zach helped me kind of catch this, is there's an interesting rhythm in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, and specifically in the description of creation. And the rhythm goes like this. There is creation. Occasionally God pronounces it good. And then it says, and evening and morning, the first day. And the one thing that's constant through each of those is evening and morning, the first day, the second day, the third day, etc. And something happens in each of those days. So it's repeated 6 different times. And then something really, really quite remarkable happens, because on the 7th day, there is no mention of time. There's no evening and day, the 7th day. There's no mention of time. And it began to dawn on me, before the dawn of time, it began to dawn on me, I wonder why. And so, with the help of my pastor, I began to realize, and he brought this to my attention, that perhaps one way to grasp what's going on here, and clearly Scripture is divinely inspired. God places it on the author's hearts to write something in particular. But one way to do this is to make some comparisons, okay? And so the question would be, how do other cultures whose writers wrote creation accounts, how did they handle this creation thing? And specifically, there are at least 3, I'm sure there are more, that we can actually look at a very similar rhythm. The Egyptian culture, which are both, the first 3 here are all pretty ancient. The Egyptian culture, the Babylonian culture, and the Greek culture. And the interesting thing about this is there's some similarities in what's created when. And there's enough to say, I wonder what connections there are. Now, clearly, when you look at Genesis, we know that the first 5 books of the Bible were written by Moses, and he was a scholar. He had the best library in the world, literally in the world, at the time that he was in Egypt, and the records they kept and everything else. But the thing to keep in mind is that in these creation accounts, on the 7th day, the gods all created a place for themselves. And when you look at Genesis, there is no such thing. There isn't God saying, well, let me build Mount Olympus so I can reside there and look down on these pitiful creatures called humans and see what happens. You have that actually in Greek mythology. Zeus and all the gods are on Mount Olympus, and they're portrayed in a variety of ways, whether you see it in movies or other things. And they're looking at humans and what they're doing to one another, and they send stuff, and they're very fallible in a lot of ways. But the gods in these other accounts are all significantly separated from their subjects, or the ones that worship them. And so in the Egyptian culture, that's true. In the Babylonian culture and in the Greek culture, those are 3 ancient cultures that all have a similarity to that. But God, as we know him in the pages of Scripture, doesn't do that. And if you wanted to find the gods in these other cultures, you would go to that place to see and meet. Well, you wouldn't survive it, but you see the gods there. Now, hang with me. This holds together little by little, because on the seventh day the gods were all creating a place for themselves. Very majestic, very, very awesome, something that provoked fear. There were trials to be able to get through it all. But God, as we know him, didn't do any such thing. So the question is where is the place that God invites us to meet him? Because when we get to this, and this is where we get the idea of Sabbath, it arises out of this. But on that seventh day, there is no mention of time. Now, let's be very clear, okay? God is the master of time. Time does not master him. He stands outside of time. But the people that he yearns and created for relationship to reflect him are rooted in time. Everything we do is rooted in time. And so, could it be, and this is just a possibility, but could it be that time itself is where God invites us to meet him? Because it's not stated, it's not rooted. We have 6 different times that he says, evening and day, the first day. Evening and morning, the first day. Evening and morning, the sixth day. Then to the seventh day, it says, God sets this day aside as set apart, otherwise known as holy. And he finished his work, and he looked at it and said, it is very good, very good. And what I would propose for your consideration is that maybe, just maybe, time is the very place that God has invited us into to find him. Now, what's the link? Because how do we get there? And to land, not land it, but to get a clear understanding of our landing place is that what is it that opens the window of time so we can meet God there? And I would propose, which might be a little frightening, but I would propose that the answer to that question is silence. Silence opens the window of time to meet God where he's awaiting us, because he's waiting for us in time. It is a timeless place for him, but it is time-based place for us. The other thing that I would say, and this is where silence comes into play, is silence creates a window for us to be, not to review all of our beliefs, not to bring things to God to say, see, I'm worthy of being here, or anything like that. Silence actually invites us to live fully as human in time with a timeless God. What's interesting to me is that generally silence does not get rave reviews. And a lot of that is because silence is filled with things. I mean, generally, if you ask somebody, do you like silence? They might say on the abstract level, well, yeah, sure, I like to be quiet. But is silence the same thing as quiet? And when we're talking about silence, what happens to the stuff in your head? Because silence gives us an opportunity to see who is waiting for us there. I have a good friend of mine who joined on a few of our retreats. He's the voice of the Daily Audio Bible, and he said something to me that I will never forget, and that is, when I finally fell into the silence and allowed myself just to exist there, to allow myself not to fill it somehow, what I found was that silence was inhabited. And it was inhabited by a timeless God who was waiting to meet us there. And see, well, what often I hear with people that say, I could never be that quiet. I could not tolerate the silence. You know why? Because they feel it. God doesn't feel it. They feel it. And what do we fill it with? And most of the time people will say that I can't calm my thoughts down. So what we fill that silence with is our long developed and long repeated narratives about us, not about God, not about just existing, but about us, our insufficiency, our inadequacy, our unacceptability, our condemned state. And we roll it over in our minds and convince ourselves that we have no business being there because we're afraid and we sense that there is someone there who wants to love us as we are, not as we should be. Because we're never going to be what we should be. That target that we have about us and how we should be is a moving target. As a matter of fact, it's always floating up, which means that I am always in a state of failure. But silence opens a window that if we can begin to detoxify from the noise of our world and the noise of our heads, what we find is a loving, passionate, crazy God that loves us so much that he has actually opened a window in time for us to meet him. And that's unnerving, it's jarring, but once we settle into it, it's comforting and consoling. It's very much like, and I see this played out a lot recently. It's my little grandson. He's now 3 weeks old. He's getting accustomed to being with people. And he can put on a pretty good wail at times, unnerving his young parents. But if the parent can be present and determinedly, it's not really a word, but determined to stay present in the midst of all that wailing and allow him to begin to slow down and to begin to relax in the arms of his parent, and before too long, he too is quiet, resting in the love and trust of the one who's holding him. And that is a remarkable picture of silence. I would state, I would even push in and say, I would assert that God desires us to engage him as the human beings we are, not as the restless, demanding, condemned, broken humans that we see ourselves always to be. Because he sees us as we are. And he still delights in us. Now, you can get into the long theological discussions about we have been given Christ's righteousness and he sees us in Christ and that's who he sees. Fine, he does. But the funny thing about it is that when we evaluate ourselves, not God evaluating us, when we evaluate ourselves, we want to hide rather than reach out into that silence and find him waiting for us there with comfort, with consolation, with grace that actually enables us to learn from the things that we've done rather than condemning us for the things that we are. And this is exactly, just to link this up a little bit, this is exactly what makes me so passionate about the stuff that we're doing with the silent retreats. Because for most people, when we talk about the silent retreats, they say, well, I could never be quiet that long. And for a lot of people that make that very statement, they walk out different people because they were willing to at least trust rather than predict what they can manage and what they can't. And this is exactly, just to kind of land the plane solidly, this is exactly what fires my passion to do these silent retreats and speak into the next generation that the church is not, the church, the people of the church are not the Abba that is waiting for them in silence. The Abba that's waiting for them in silence is the one that loves them as they are, including loving them as they are, not the way they see themselves. And this is what has soured, I would suggest, this is what has soured almost an entire generation on the church. Because it's trappings, it's traditions, it's endless debates and conversations and arguments over minutia that doesn't really, dare I say it, amount to much more than a hill of beans compared to the immense loving Abba that invites us into the seventh day and says, time is suspended for now. It's just us. Because we have an entire generation that has filled their lives with noise and distraction and self-medication and comparison instead of listening to that still small voice that Isaiah talks about, or that the prophet, I'm forgetting already, Elijah was talking about when he ran to a cave just to hide. And God invites him out of there. And at first he thought it was a tornado or a hurricane. It was a great wind. It was lightning and thunder and everything else. And he comes out, and the only thing that invites him into his presence is a still small voice. You know what? The only way that I can hear a whisper is in silence. It is not with the blaring and jarring noise of our culture, and I might add, the interior culture we have that is chirping and saying things about us all the time. Now, it's not some disembodied voice. It is one that we have constructed to try to make us good enough. And just realize that if never being good enough has been on your lips in the past, then we are chained to the comparison, because enough is a comparison word. Enough is a word that says, well, they're enough, but I'm not. And then we quiet ourselves. We walk into this embodied, inhabited silence, and we find a still small voice that says quietly, I love you as you are, not as you should be, because you'll never be what you should be, because your comparisons and expectations and demands of yourself will never be met. But if you live fully into the fullness of who you are as a human being, both living with the breath of God in you that conforms and continues to conform you into the image of God himself, but still confined to the dust that you're made of, quite honestly, something remarkable can happen, because we can see that in our relationships and other places. Now, this is not true just for the next generation that I feel so passionate about. This is true for any generation. The problem is, particularly of mine, okay, and I skip back 2 or 3 generations from the current one. The idea, we love to espouse and give lip service to the whole community thing, but we don't invite people into that very community when we're in the greatest pain. And that's when we need them the most. And I say that because that is a description of where I'm at tonight is the degree of swirling crises that are going on in my life around important people in my life. I have this really strong temptation and draw to hunker down and to isolate, and that's exactly the 180-degree opposite of what I actually need. And I've recognized that. And so I've got to find a way to get through that, and it's going to be some very small, halting steps coming out to say, I'm not doing very well. This is really hard. And I'm bumping up against realities of our existence as humans that I don't really like very much. As a matter of fact, I rebel against them. And I don't need anybody to tell me the next new doctrine that I need to embrace. I need somebody to say, yeah, me too. I get that. I've been there. As a matter of fact, I may be in there too. And somebody will say, well, what good is that? Is blind leading the blind? Well, the one advantage the blind leading the blind has, they do have each other. It may not lead, in our way of thinking, it may not lead any place productive, but they at least have each other enough to have the collective wisdom that might actually get them out of the place that they were at. So this is true for any generation. It's just not the next one. In some respects, my generation has contributed to this generation and their susceptibility to all of the lies and narratives that are running in their heads about the only way that I can figure out my worth and importance is in terms of someone else. And that is a tyrant. That is enslaving. And unfortunately, that's what I end up seeing. It's hard to watch, but at the same time, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, went home. I know it so well because that's something I've done. So, the first key I would suggest to you in terms of our spiritual formation is pursuing God in a window of time that He has offered us to actually meet us there in silence. And that's something that is not only frightening, but also comforting. And finding that is extremely, extremely life-changing. It's life-changing. And I can do testimony after testimony of doing these retreats for 12 years. And even in that 12-year time, students are changing. And they're walking out and saying, I never knew. I wish I had before or sooner. So that's it for tonight. A few end of program reminders that I usually give. If you have questions, if I prompted some reaction, please send me the feedback. You can do that through Instagram by DMing us there or leave a comment on the website at drmitch.com. Please do. I love the interaction. I don't get very much of it these days, but it's nice to hear your thoughts and reactions to some of the things that I'm ranting about and rolling around in my head. You can subscribe and follow us not only on the website, but also on Instagram. We can be found at the Psych Monologues, all lowercase. At Facebook, you can follow me there at ray.mitch, M-I-T-S-C-H. And LinkedIn at drmitch as well. So any of those places you can subscribe and follow, and every time a new podcast drops, you can be notified of that. And then you can go to your favorite platform, whichever you prefer, whether that's Spotify or Stitcher or iTunes, Podbean, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, any of those platforms, any of the places that you consume podcasts, that would be the place to find us. The other item that I'll mention again. I mentioned this in the last podcast, but we're going to be providing a second silent retreat for alums, not only of the silent retreat, but also CCU. And that date currently is May 19th through the 22nd. Unfortunately or otherwise, we're getting a lot of registrations already. We may have to consider putting in some extra retreats in the fall and the following spring to accommodate the people that are interested in engaging this idea and process of silence. But the one thing I want to make really clear, to secure a spot, you have to register. That doesn't guarantee you a spot, but at least gets you on the list. And we get a lot of turnover of people coming and going and having to leave because of schedule and so forth. So, to check it out, be sure to check out the web page on the drmitch.com website. Go to CCU, the drop-down menu, and you will find the specific web page for the silent retreats. You can keep tabs on what's going on there. We're going to be putting a donation button there, so if you decide to register for a particular retreat, I don't have dates yet for fall of 22 or spring of 23, but I have put the registration links up there, and you want to secure a spot, then hopefully we will have a donation button on that page so you can do that. You're not going to be interacting with Sacred Heart Retreat House because they don't process our registrations or anything. So you're going to have to do that through the donation button itself. It'll be treated as a donation, tax-deductible donation, and a means ultimately to continue to develop our retreats in the future. On that note, if you're interested in partnering with us to continue to grow the scholarship fund for CCU students, my hope is in the future for other students that want to come to grow. We need to grow this fund. It is not cheap to do these retreats and to make them affordable for young people that are in jobs or going to school or whatever. But you can do that by your tax deductible gift on the donation button, and so you can find it in a variety of places. You can follow us and be able to do it there. And you can do it a couple different ways. A continuing gift is very, very generous, but would be very helpful in terms of helping us to develop this fund even more expeditiously so we can put these retreats on. Or a one-time gift. Either one is tax deductible, and you can set that up for students in the future. So if you want to contribute, you can contribute by the donation button on the website for the CCU Silent Retreats, or if you'd prefer to do it through check, you can contribute through check by making your checks out to 1615.tv. You would address your envelope exactly the same way, so 1615.tv, and the address is P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado 80104. So thanks so much for joining me. There's more to come. Thanks for taking a time out of your day to listen. I pray that it's been encouraging and challenging, and I look forward to seeing you again. But again, thanks for joining me tonight. Love ya. Later.